Every summer there is a short window, usually right before the first real stretch of sustained heat hits, where the handful of decisions you make either set your lawn up to coast through the season or set it up to spend the next 2 months playing catch-up. Miss that window and none of it is fatal on its own, but the small mistakes stack on top of each other fast once the heat actually arrives, and by the time you notice the damage, you are already behind. There are 7 specific things worth handling in the next week, before the next real heat wave rolls in, and every single one of them is cheap, quick, and backed by real turf science rather than a gimmick. Quick note before we get into the list, since this is exactly the kind of thing people ask me about constantly. If you are tired of guessing what your lawn actually needs at each point in the season, I wrote a short ebook that walks you through your specific grass type, month by month, so you always know exactly what to put down and when. Scan the QR code on screen, or check the link in the description if you want a copy. Now, let's get into the list. The single most common mistake homeowners make heading into a hot stretch is cutting the grass too short right beforehand, usually to buy themselves an extra week before the next mow. That backfires fast, because shorter grass leaves more bare soil exposed to direct sunlight, and exposed soil heats up and dries out far quicker than soil shaded by taller blades. The roots underneath depend on that shade to stay cool, and once it is gone, the whole root zone starts baking right when the plant can least afford it. Think of it the same way a patch of forest floor stays cool and damp under a full canopy even during a heat wave, while a clear-cut area right next to it dries out within hours once the shade is gone. Grass blades are doing the exact same job for the soil underneath them, and cutting that canopy down right before the hottest stretch of the year removes the one thing keeping the root zone from baking. The 1/3 rule is the standard here, meaning you should never remove more than 1/3 of the total blade length in a single cut. For cool season grass like fescue, bluegrass, or ryegrass, keep the mowing height somewhere between 3 and 4 inches through the hot months. Warm season grasses like Bermuda, Zoysia, and St. Augustine can handle a shorter cut since they are built for heat and do not need as much shade at the soil surface. If your grass has already gotten a bit tall and you are tempted to knock it straight back down to the ideal height in one pass, resist that urge, since dropping it all at once in the middle of a heat window shocks the plant at the worst possible time. Raise the deck 1 notch, mow, wait about 3 days, then bring it down the rest of the way gradually. While you are adjusting the deck, it is also worth leaving the clippings on the lawn rather than bagging them, since fresh clippings break down within a week or so in a healthy lawn and return a meaningful portion of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you would otherwise be buying in a bag, while also acting as a light mulch that helps hold moisture in the soil during the hottest stretch. It is also worth reconsidering how often you mow once real heat sets in. A lawn growing slower in the heat often does not need cutting as frequently as it did in the flush growth of spring, and mowing on a fixed weekly schedule regardless of how much the grass has actually grown just adds unnecessary stress to a plant that would rather be left alone for an extra few days. Watering timing and depth matter more than almost anything else you do all summer, and most people are getting at least one part of it wrong. Water in the early morning, somewhere between 4 and 9, before the sun is fully up, since watering at midday loses a real chunk of it to evaporation before it ever reaches the roots, and watering late at night leaves the grass sitting wet in the dark for hours, which is exactly the setup fungal disease needs to take hold. Morning watering avoids both problems at once, since the moisture has time to soak down into the root zone before the heat of the day pulls it back out through evaporation, and the leaf surface has a chance to dry off once the sun comes up rather than sitting wet all night long. The bigger issue is depth. Short daily watering sessions keep roots shallow, since roots only grow as deep as the water reaches, and shallow roots are the first thing to fail once a real heat wave hits. Aim for somewhere around 1 to 1.5 inches of total water a week, counting rainfall, split across 2 or 3 deep sessions rather than a light daily sprinkle. A simple way to check your system is to set a few empty tuna cans or shallow containers around the yard, run a zone for 15 minutes, and measure how much landed in each can, which tells you both how evenly your sprinklers are covering the yard and exactly how long you need to run each zone to hit that target inch. It is also worth resisting the urge to panic water once a lawn starts looking a little rough, since cranking the timer up in response tends to backfire. Soil that stays soggy for too long pushes oxygen out of the root zone, which suffocates roots rather than helping them, and it invites disease at the same time it keeps roots shallow instead of encouraging them to grow deeper in search of moisture. One more timing detail worth building into this week specifically, if there is a real heat wave showing up in the forecast, is giving the lawn one deep, thorough soak a day or two before it actually arrives, rather than waiting until the hottest day to react. A soil profile that already has good moisture reserves built up gives the roots a buffer to draw on once demand for water spikes sharply on the hottest days, while a lawn that is already running on the dry side when the heat lands has almost no cushion left before it starts showing real stress. If you have cool season grass and daytime temperatures are sitting consistently in the 80s or above, this is the week to put the nitrogen fertilizer away rather than reach for it. If you are not sure whether your grass counts as cool season or warm season, a quick rule of thumb is that cool season grasses tend to stay green through winter in most of the country and slow down in peak summer heat, while warm season grasses tend to go dormant and brown in winter and hit their most active growth right in the middle of summer. So which category your lawn falls into usually becomes obvious just by thinking about which season it actually looks its best in. Nitrogen forces the plant to push out new leaf growth, and a lawn under heat stress does not have the spare energy to support that kind of growth without burning through reserves it needs just to survive the season. That tender new growth is also considerably more vulnerable to fungal disease in hot, humid conditions, which is the last thing a stressed lawn needs. Warm season grasses handle summer nitrogen better, since they are actively growing, rather than fighting the heat. But even those grasses run into real burn risk once temperatures climb above roughly 90 degrees. So caution applies pretty much across the board during the hottest stretch. Holding off does not mean giving up on feeding the lawn for the year, it just means waiting for the right window. Once temperatures ease back down in early fall, and the grass shifts back into active growth mode, that is exactly when a proper feeding does the most good, helping the plant rebuild the energy reserves it spent surviving the summer, and pushing new root growth heading into the cooler months. So think of skipping nitrogen this week as banking that application for a point in the season where it can actually be put to use. Getting this kind of seasonal timing right, knowing exactly which week to feed and which week to hold off, is precisely the kind of decision the ebook I put together walks you through for your specific grass and region. The QR code is on screen now, or grab the link in the description if you want to check it out. A dull mower blade does not cut grass cleanly. It tears it, and torn grass tips lose moisture far faster than a clean cut ever would. That extra moisture loss shows up within a day or two as a whitish, ragged look across the top of the lawn, and torn tissue is also an easier entry point for fungal spores looking for a way in. Most guidance calls for sharpening a mower blade at least twice a season, once in spring and once around the middle of summer, and sooner than that if you have recently clipped a rock, a root, or a sprinkler head, since even one hard hit can noticeably dull the edge. This takes 10 minutes with a file or a bench grinder, or a few dollars at most hardware stores if you would rather have it done for you, and it is one of the cheapest, most overlooked fixes on this entire list. If you are not sure whether your blade actually needs sharpening, look closely at the cut ends of the grass blades a day after mowing. A clean cut looks crisp and green straight across, while a torn or ragged edge, especially one that has already started turning brown or white at the tip, is a clear sign the blade is due for an edge. Blades dull faster than most people expect, since mowing over even soft debris like small twigs, acorns, or a patch of sandy soil gradually wears down the cutting edge the same way running a kitchen knife through a cutting board eventually dulls it. So a blade that felt sharp in May is often noticeably duller by midsummer even without a single dramatic hit. Grub damage does not show up right away, which is exactly why it is worth checking for now rather than waiting until you see the symptoms. Japanese beetle grubs and similar white, C-shaped larvae hatch once soil temperature at around a 6-inch depth holds steady near 70 degrees, and a cheap soil thermometer from the hardware store tells you in about a minute whether your yard has crossed that threshold recently. If it has, or is about to, that is the window where a targeted treatment does the most good, since catching grubs while they are small and near the surface is far more effective than trying to deal with root damage after the fact. A simple field check backs this up further. Grab a section of lawn that looks a little off and give it a firm tug. If it lifts up loosely like a piece of carpet with no resistance underneath, peel back a square foot of that turf and count the larvae you find. More than 5 or 6 per square foot is generally considered the threshold where treatment is worth doing, and low toxicity options like beneficial nematodes, which are microscopic organisms that specifically hunt grubs in the soil, can be applied with a simple hose end sprayer if you would rather avoid a synthetic insecticide. Catching this early matters more than it might seem, since grubs feeding on roots underground rarely produce visible symptoms right away. By the time a lawn shows the classic signs, spongy patches that lift like a loose carpet, or skunks and birds tearing up sections of turf hunting for a meal, the root damage underneath has usually been building for weeks already, which makes a proactive soil temperature check now considerably more useful than waiting for those obvious signs to show up later in the season. Exactly when soil crosses that 70-degree threshold varies quite a bit depending on where you live and how the season has been running, which is exactly why checking your own soil directly with a thermometer beats going off a generic calendar date that might be a few weeks off for your particular region. Brown patch is a fungal disease that activates once nighttime temperatures hold above roughly 70 degrees for several nights in a row, combined with humidity that keeps the grass blades wet well into the night. Once it takes hold, a healthy section of lawn can go from fine to bare dirt in about a week, which makes this one of the faster moving problems on this whole list. The good news is that a preventative application, timed right as those nighttime temperatures start crossing that threshold, costs very little and is far more effective than trying to treat the damage after it already shows up as circular brown patches across the yard. A simple fungicide built around propiconazole, applied once with a hose end sprayer at the rate on the label, generally covers a lawn through the riskiest stretch of the season, and reapplying is only necessary if you actually start seeing disease pressure show up despite the first round. The disease itself gets its name from the roughly circular brown patches it leaves behind, sometimes ringed with a slightly darker or grayish border while conditions are actively wet, and it tends to hit the lushest, most heavily watered or heavily fertilized sections of a lawn hardest, since dense, tender growth holds moisture against the blade surface longer than a leaner, more open stand of grass does. Watching the overnight low in your local forecast for a few nights in a row is really all it takes to know when this window is opening up. Knowing exactly which threat to watch for at which point in the season, instead of reacting after the damage already shows up, is exactly the kind of timing the ebook I wrote lays out for your specific region and grass type. The QR code is on screen now, or grab the link in the description if you want a copy. This one gets overlooked constantly because it does not look like a lawn care task at all. Furniture left sitting out for a party, a trailer parked on the grass for a weekend, a trampoline set up in one spot all summer, all of it crushes the crown of the grass underneath, and a stressed or dormant lawn does not have the spare energy to recover from that kind of physical damage the way it would in spring. The frustrating part is that the damage often does not show up right away. You will not necessarily see it in the middle of summer while everything is already a bit stressed and uneven looking, but you will see it once the rest of the lawn greens back up in fall, and that one crushed patch just sits there, still dead, weeks after everything around it recovered. If you know something heavy is going to sit on the lawn for more than a day or two, move it every few days, or lay down a few stepping stones or a sheet of plywood on the spots that get the heaviest regular traffic. This applies just as much to a kiddie pool left in one spot for a week, a stack of moving boxes waiting to be unloaded, or even a parked car pulled onto the grass to make room in the driveway for a gathering, since all of it applies the same kind of sustained pressure that a healthy, actively growing lawn shrugs off far more easily than one already dealing with summer heat. A good rule of thumb is that anything sitting in one spot for more than about 48 hours during a hot stretch is worth relocating or shielding, since that is roughly the point where crushed grass blades start losing their ability to bounce back on their own. None of these 7 things are dramatic on their own, and that is sort of the point. A lawn does not usually fail because of one big mistake. It fails because 3 or 4 small oversights happen in the same short window, right as the plant is heading into its most stressful stretch of the year, with the least room for error. Mowing too short at the same time, watering stays shallow, and nitrogen keeps going down, means the plant is fighting on every front at once, with no reserve energy left over for any of it. Handle these 7 things now, while there is still a bit of a buffer before the real heat sets in, and you are giving the lawn a much easier season, since it is dealing with the heat on its own terms instead of dealing with the heat and a stack of avoidable stress at the same time. There is a reason turf researchers talk about stress in terms of layers rather than single events. A lawn can usually absorb one problem at a time without much visible damage, whether that is a short mow, a missed watering, or a hot afternoon spent with a trampoline sitting on one corner of the yard. It is the combination, several of those layers stacking up in the same short window, that pushes a lawn from merely stressed into visibly damaged, and the whole point of handling this list now is to knock out as many of those layers as possible before they ever get the chance to stack. A lawn that gets mowed too short, watered too shallow, and fed nitrogen all in the same week heading into a heat wave is essentially fighting 3 separate battles with the energy it would normally use to fight one, and that is exactly the kind of combination that turns an otherwise resilient lawn into one struggling to hang on by August. I want to be straight with you about what regret actually looks like here, since it is not usually a lawn that dies overnight. It is a much slower, more frustrating version of summer. Grass cut too short and watered too shallow limps through July looking thin and stressed rather than thriving. A missed grub window means root damage you do not notice until August, when the lawn suddenly looks worse for no obvious reason. A missed brown patch window means a healthy-looking lawn can develop bare, circular dead spots within a week once conditions line up. None of these outcomes require a full lawn replacement, but every one of them costs you time, money, and a much longer recovery than if the underlying cause had been handled during the 1 week where it was cheap and easy to fix. A dull mower blade left unsharpened all summer, for example, does not ruin a lawn on its own, but it steadily thins out the grass and opens the door to disease week after week, so that by August you are dealing with a noticeably weaker stand of turf without ever having pinpointed a single obvious cause. A missed grub check tells a similar story, since a soil temperature crossing 70 degrees in June without anyone noticing can turn into a lawn with several soft, spongy dead patches by late summer, patches that then need to be reseeded or resodded in fall, rather than simply prevented for the cost of a soil thermometer and a few minutes outside earlier in the season. That gap, between a 5-minute fix now and weeks of visible frustration later, is really what this whole list comes down to. So to recap the full list, raise your mower deck and stick to the 1/3 rule. Fix your watering to deep and early rather than shallow and late. Stop feeding nitrogen to cool season grass once the heat sets in, sharpen your mower blade, check your soil temperature for grub activity, watch the overnight lows for the brown patch window, and get anything heavy off the lawn before it sits there long enough to crush the grass underneath. Every one of these takes an afternoon at most, and doing them this week, before the next real heat wave lands, is the difference between a lawn that coasts through summer and one that spends the whole season trying to catch back up. If you want the complete month-by-month plan for your specific lawn, covering exactly what to put down and when so you are never just guessing, the ebook I wrote is linked in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen to grab it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.